The T-64 is the most secret main battle tank of the Soviet Union, which became a legend forever. 1967. At a secret proving ground near Kharkiv, something incredible is happening. A huge steel machine, which no one in the world has ever seen before, fires 10 shells in a row in a matter of seconds, and each of them accurately hits a target at a distance of 2 kilometers. The generals watching the tests cannot believe their eyes, because not a single tank in the world is capable of firing at such a speed. There is no loader inside this machine because his work is performed by an ingenious mechanism created by Soviet engineers. Thus, a tank is born that will change the entire world tank production and force Western designers to rack their brains over its secrets for decades. To understand how this revolutionary machine appeared, it is necessary to go back 10 years into the midst of the Cold War. The mid-50s became a time of fierce confrontation between two superpowers. The Soviet Union and the United States of America competed literally in everything, from space rockets to tank armor. The arms race was gaining furious momentum, and each side sought to gain an advantage on the battlefield. In 1959, the British made a serious step forward by installing a new, powerful 105mm caliber gun on their Centurion tank. This gun could penetrate the armor of Soviet tanks at distances that were previously considered safe. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization gained a serious advantage, and the Soviet Union had to respond. The response was the T-62 tank, adopted into service in 1961. It was equipped with a 115mm caliber smoothbore gun, which surpassed the British weapon in power. It would seem that parity was restored, and it was possible to calm down. But in the secret design bureau of the Kharkiv plant number 75, work was already in full swing on a completely different project. There they were creating not just a new tank, but a machine of the future, which was supposed to outpace its time by a whole generation. This project was led by a legendary man, Alexander Alexandrovich Morozov. It was he who, during the Great Patriotic War, created the famous T-34, the best medium tank of World War II. After the victory, Morozov continued to improve Soviet combat vehicles. Under his leadership, the T-44 and T-54 appeared. The experience accumulated over decades allowed the Kharkiv designer to see what others did not notice. Morozov understood that a simple increase in gun caliber and armor thickness led to a dead end. Tanks were becoming heavier and more clumsy, and the crews could not cope with the increased load. A fundamentally new approach was needed. The main problem of all tanks of that time was the process of loading the weapon. With an increase in gun caliber, the shells became heavier and larger. The loader had to possess remarkable physical strength to lift heavy ammunition time after time and send it into the breach. In battle, when adrenaline runs high and every second counts, a human inevitably grew tired and the rate of fire dropped. The T-62 tank could make only 4 shots per minute, and this was considered the norm. Morozov decided to completely eliminate the human factor from the loading process. The idea of automatic loading of a tank gun had been in the air for a long time, but no one in the world had been able to implement it on a production vehicle. The task was too complex. Too many technical problems stood in the way of the designers. However, the Kharkiv engineers took up the matter with a perseverance worthy of admiration. They developed a unique mechanism in which the shells and charges were placed in a rotating container. It was enough for the gunner to press a button on the control panel, and the automation itself found the required type of ammunition, extracted it from the stowage, and sent it into the gun barrel. In 1962, the Design Bureau presented a prototype that received the secret designation Object 432. This machine was radically different from everything that existed in world tank production. The crew was reduced to 3 people because a loader became simply unnecessary. The height of the tank was reduced to 2 meters and 17 centimeters, which made it an extremely difficult target on the battlefield. The rate of fire increased to an incredible 8 shots per minute, 2.5 times more than that of any other tank in the world. But the autoloader was only one of the revolutionary solutions embedded in the new machine. For the first time in the history of tank building, Kharkiv designers used composite armor. Between 2 layers of steel, they placed a special filler made of another material that perfectly resisted cumulative shells. Such armor was lighter than conventional steel armor, but at the same time provided much better protection. The frontal projection of the tank withstood hits from the most powerful Western weapons with a caliber of 105 millimeters. The undercarriage, with small road wheels made of aluminum alloy, became the lightest in the world among vehicles of a similar class. Object 432 existed so far only in a single copy, and it had to go through a real hell of tests. The Soviet military did not intend to adopt a machine that would not prove its reliability in the harshest conditions. Factory tests began in the same year of 1962, and the first results exceeded all expectations. The tank demonstrated a fantastic rate of fire for its time. Its autoloader worked flawlessly, and its composite armor withstood hits that would pierce through any other tank. But the real trial awaited the machine at the training grounds of the Soviet Army. The military drove the prototype through sands and swamps, forced it to overcome water obstacles and steep climbs. The tank had to prove that it was capable of fighting in any climatic conditions, from the scorching deserts of Central Asia to the icy expanses of the Arctic. The testers deliberately created extreme situations to identify all the weak points of the design, and such places were found. The main problem turned out to be the engine. The Kharkiv designers installed a new 700 horsepower diesel motor on the tank, which provided the vehicle with a maximum speed of 65 kilometers per hour. This engine was more compact and lighter than its predecessors, which made it possible to make the engine transmission compartment surprisingly small. It was thanks to this layout that the tank turned out to be so low and unnoticeable. However, a high price had to be paid for compactness. The motor turned out to be extremely sensitive to fuel quality and compliance with operating rules. The slightest violation of the technical regulations led to breakdowns, and the engines of the first series often failed. Alexander Morozov perfectly understood that without a reliable motor, the most perfect tank would remain only a beautiful toy. The Design Bureau launched large-scale work on refining the power plant. Engineers analyzed every breakdown, looked for the causes of failures, and developed effective solutions. In parallel, other components of the machine were being improved. Special attention was paid to the autoloader. After all, this mechanism had no analogs in the world, and experience in its operation simply did not exist. While the designers struggled with technical problems, the military leadership of the country closely followed the progress of the tests. The Cold War continued, and the Soviet Union needed a new generation tank. Western countries did not stand still. Their designers were also working on promising combat vehicles. Time was pressing, but no one wanted to adopt an unfinished tank. Object 432 was undergoing tests in conditions of the strictest secrecy. Even many high-ranking military officials did not know about the existence of this machine. Western intelligence agencies did not suspect what kind of surprise the Soviet Union was preparing for them. By the mid-60s, the main problems were successfully resolved. The engine life significantly increased, the autoloader worked stably, and the undercarriage proved its reliability in the most severe conditions. In 1966, a historic decision was made to adopt the new vehicle into service with the Soviet Army. The tank received the official designation T-64, and under this name it was destined to enter the history of world tank production. The combat weight of the production tank was 36 tons, which was significantly less than that of Western vehicles of a similar class. At the same time, the T-64 surpassed them in firepower and protection. The 115mm caliber gun allowed hitting any enemy tanks at a distance of up to 2 kilometers. The cumulative shell penetrated armor with a thickness of 450 millimeters, which guaranteed the destruction of any armored target of that time. In addition to the gun, the tank was armed with a 7.62mm caliber machine gun to fight enemy infantry. A special pride of the designers was the optical rangefinder sight, which also appeared for the first time precisely on a Soviet tank. Previously, gunners had to determine the distance to the target by eye or use bulky external rangefinders. Now, the distance was measured instantly and with high accuracy. The gunner set the ballistics corresponding to the selected type of shell in the sight, entered a correction for the movement of his tank, and a special calculator automatically calculated the aiming point. The probability of hitting a target with the first shot increased significantly compared to previous vehicles. The crew of the T-64 consisted of only 3 people. The commander was located in the turret and was responsible for observing the battlefield and making tactical decisions. The gunner sat to the left of the gun and controlled the fire. The driver mechanic was located in the front part of the hull and led the vehicle into battle. Each of them had to possess high qualifications, because controlling a revolutionary tank required special knowledge and skills. This was no longer just a combat mechanism, but a highly complex armament system created according to the latest word in science and technology. Serial production unfolded at the Kharkiv plant, where this tank was created. The first machines began to arrive in the troops, and Soviet tank crews finally saw what kind of weapon their motherland had entrusted to them. Many of them could not believe that there was no loader inside this low-slung steel monster, and the shells themselves flew into the gun barrel at the push of a button. Commanders of tank units who received the first production vehicles found themselves in a difficult situation. Before them stood equipment that required a completely different level of training for personnel. Tankers, accustomed to the simple and unpretentious T-54 and T-55, looked at the new machine with distrust and even fear. The autoloader seemed to them something fantastic, and the abundance of instruments and switches in the fighting compartment caused confusion. The era of mastering the most advanced tank on the planet was beginning, and this path turned out to be thorny. The first months of operation in the troops revealed a serious problem. Driver mechanics trained on old machines handled the new tank in the same way as the previous ones. They did not comply with strict requirements for warming up the engine, poured in low-quality fuel, and neglected the technical maintenance schedule. The capricious diesel motor took revenge for such an attitude with frequent breakdowns. In some units, the number of faulty tanks reached alarming figures, and the command began to sound the alarm. The problem lay not in the design of the machine, but in the human factor. The Soviet military leadership made a decision to create special training centers for preparing T-64 crews. The best officers and sergeants were sent there to undergo an advanced training course. Instructors explained to them the features of operating the new tank, taught them how to correctly handle the autoloader and the optical rangefinder sight. After returning to their units, these specialists became mentors for the rest of the tankers. Gradually, the situation began to change for the better. The crews learned to feel their machines, to understand their character and capabilities. The number of breakdowns decreased sharply, and the combat effectiveness of units grew. Tankers appreciated the advantages of automatic loading, which allowed firing at an unprecedented speed. In training battle conditions, the T-64 crews invariably defeated their comrades on old machines. 8 shots per minute versus 4 meant that the new tank managed to destroy the enemy before the enemy managed to aim. The operation of the sighting system was particularly impressive. During exercises, gunners demonstrated striking accuracy of fire at long distances. The optical rangefinder allowed instantly determining the distance to the target, and the ballistic calculator automatically calculated the necessary corrections. Experienced gunners hit targets with the first shot from a distance of more than 1.5 kilometers, which was previously considered practically impossible. Western tanks of that time did not have similar equipment, and their crews had to rely on their own eyesight and intuition. The low silhouette of the tank also received a high rating in the troops. A height of only 2 meters and 17 centimeters made the T-64 an extremely difficult target on the battlefield. Against the background of hills and terrain folds, the vehicle literally dissolved, becoming almost invisible to the enemy. Commanders quickly learned to use this advantage, choosing positions from which the tank could fire while remaining unnoticed. Combined with a powerful gun and a high rate of fire, such tactics made the T-64 a deadly opponent. The undercarriage, with small road wheels made of aluminum alloy, also proved its effectiveness. Despite the fears of skeptics, it turned out to be sufficiently strong and reliable. The tank confidently overcame cross-country terrain, forded water obstacles, and climbed steep slopes. Driver mechanics noted the good handling of the machine and the smoothness of the ride. By these small-diameter wheels, the T-64 could be unmistakably distinguished from any other tank, and soon this feature became its calling card. Meanwhile, the design bureau of Alexander Morozov did not stop working on perfecting its creation. The experience of troop operation provided invaluable information about which components and assemblies required modification. Engineers constantly made changes to the design, increasing the reliability and combat characteristics of the machine. The engine life constantly increased thanks to the use of new materials and technologies. The autoloader became more and more flawless, and the sighting system received new capabilities. In parallel, work was underway on a deep modernization of the tank. Morozov understood that Western designers would not sit idly by and would sooner or later create machines capable of resisting the T-64. To maintain superiority, it was necessary to constantly move forward. The main direction of modernization was the strengthening of armament. The 115mm caliber gun was powerful, but the designers knew they could do even better. In the Kharkiv Bureau, a new weapon was already being developed, which was supposed to raise the firepower of the Soviet tank to an unattainable height. In May 1968, the government of the Soviet Union made a decision on the serial production of a new modification of the tank, which received the designation T-64A. This machine carried a weapon of such power that all existing ideas about tank armament had to be revised. The 125mm caliber smoothbore gun surpassed everything that was in service with the armies of the world. Not a single Western tank possessed anything similar, and this advantage was maintained for many years. The creation of the new weapon required the designers to solve many of the most complex tasks. An increase in caliber meant a growth in recoil when firing, which meant it was necessary to strengthen the stabilization system and the gun mount. The shells became even heavier and larger, which required a redesign of the autoloader. The Kharkiv engineers coped with all these problems while maintaining the compactness of the fighting compartment and the high rate of fire. The loading mechanism still provided 8 shots per minute. Despite the increased size of the ammunition, the combat weight of the modernized tank increased to 38 tons. However, the power of the 700 horsepower diesel engine turned out to be sufficient to maintain high mobility. The maximum speed was 61 kilometers per hour, which allowed the machine to maneuver rapidly on the battlefield. The crew still consisted of 3 people, a commander, a gunner, and a driver mechanic, each of whom underwent special training to work with the latest equipment. The appearance of the T-64A marked a real revolution in the classification of armored vehicles. Up to this point, tanks were traditionally divided into light, medium, and heavy. Light machines were distinguished by high mobility, but weak protection and armament. Medium tanks represented a compromise between all characteristics. Heavy ones possessed the most powerful armor and guns, but were slow and clumsy. The new Soviet machine broke this established system once and for all. The T-64A combined qualities that previously seemed incompatible. The mobility and maneuverability of this tank corresponded to the best examples of medium machines. At the same time, its 125mm caliber gun surpassed in power the guns of any heavy tanks of that time. Composite armor provided protection comparable to heavy machines, and thanks to the low silhouette, hitting this tank was significantly more difficult. Soviet military theorists proposed a new term to designate such a universal machine. Thus, the concept of the main battle tank was born. This concept quickly spread throughout the world and became generally accepted in military terminology. Western countries were forced to admit that the division into medium and heavy tanks had lost its meaning. Designers of all leading powers began to develop their own main battle tanks, focusing on the characteristics of the Soviet machine. However, catching up with the Kharkiv creation turned out to be difficult, because the T-64A was created on the basis of a unique technological backlog that Western engineers simply did not have. But the modernization of the tank did not stop there. The Design Bureau continued to improve the machine, and in 1976 an even more formidable modification appeared. The T-64B received a capability that struck the imagination of military specialists all over the world. This tank could fire guided missiles directly from the barrel of its gun. Imagine, a gunner detects an enemy vehicle at a distance of 4 kilometers, that is, twice as far as the usual distance of a tank battle. He presses a button, and not a conventional shell, but a guided missile flies out of the barrel, which accurately flies to the target. Rocket armament allowed hitting not only tanks, but also other targets. Stationary firing points, fortified enemy positions, even small-sized objects at a huge distance became vulnerable to the T-64B. The guidance system ensured the highest accuracy of hits, and the powerful warhead of the missile guaranteed the destruction of any target. At the same time, the tank retained the ability to fire conventional shells, which made it a universal combat vehicle capable of solving the most diverse tasks on the battlefield. Western intelligence agencies for a long time could not believe in the existence of such a technology. The idea of firing missiles from a tank gun seemed to them like science fiction, because no one in the world had been able to implement anything like it. When information about the capabilities of the Soviet tank finally leaked to the West, a real panic began there. Military analysts revised their assessments of the balance of forces in Europe, and designers feverishly looked for ways to somehow respond to the new threat. The Kharkiv machine turned into a real laboratory where technologies of the future were born. Each innovative solution tested on the T-64 became the basis for the next generations of Soviet tanks. Designers from all over the country studied the experience of the Kharkiv Bureau, adopting advanced ideas and adapting them for their developments. Thus began an era when one tank determined the development of the entire industry for decades to come. In Nizhny Tagil, at the Uralvagon Zavod, they closely followed the successes of the Kharkiv team. Local designers received a task to create a simpler and cheaper machine to produce, which would retain the main advantages of the T-64. The result of this work was the famous T-72, which inherited from its predecessor the autoloader, a powerful 125mm caliber gun, and the concept of a 3-person crew. This tank became the most mass-produced in the world, spreading to the armies of dozens of states. But for its existence, it is indebted precisely to the Kharkiv machine. In parallel, work was underway in Leningrad on a gas turbine tank. The designers of the Kirov plant took the very same T-64 as a basis, replacing the diesel engine with a powerful gas turbine. Thus appeared the T-80, capable of developing a fantastic speed on the highway and possessing excellent acceleration dynamics. The layout of the fighting compartment, the armament system, and the autoloader of this machine directly traced back to the Kharkiv firstborn. 3 families of Soviet main battle tanks, the T-64, T-72, and T-80, carried common genes and represented branches of one mighty tree. Western designers spent years trying to unravel the secrets of the Soviet machine. Americans, Germans, British, and French tried to create their own autoloaders, but suffered failures for a long time. The mechanism developed in Kharkiv back in the early 60s turned out to be so perfect that repeating it was extremely difficult. Only decades later did Western engineers manage to create systems comparable in characteristics, and even then, not all of them. The American Abrams and the German Leopard 2 remained with four-person crews, where the loader in the old-fashioned way manually sends shells into the breech. Composite armor, first used on the T-64, also became the standard for all modern tanks in the world. The principle of multi-layer protection with a filler between steel plates proved its effectiveness against cumulative ammunition. Western designers developed their own variants of such armor, but the Soviet Union forever remained the pioneer in this field. Every time a modern tank withstands a hit from an anti-tank missile, it happens thanks to technology born in the Kharkiv Design Bureau more than half a century ago. The optical rangefinder sight, with which the T-64 was equipped, marked the beginning of the era of high-precision tank shooting. Modern fire control systems with laser rangefinders, thermal imagers, and ballistic calculators are direct descendants of that device that allowed Soviet gunners to hit targets at distances inaccessible to the enemy. The idea of automating the aiming process, embodied on the Kharkiv machine, determined the direction of development of tank sighting systems for decades ahead. The concept of the main battle tank, born together with the T-64A, became universal for all armies of the world. Today, not a single country divides its tanks into medium and heavy. This division has sunk into the past, along with the machines of previous generations. All modern tanks are designed as universal combat platforms, capable of solving the full spectrum of tasks on the battlefield. And every time military theorists use the term main battle tank, they willingly or unwillingly pay tribute to the Kharkiv designers. Production of the T-64 and its modifications continued for many years. Thousands of these machines stood up to defend the western borders of the Soviet Union, ready at any moment to repel a possible aggression. Tankers who mastered this complex but outstanding machine were proud of their combat steeds and knew that behind the armor of the T-64, they feared no enemy. The Kharkiv tank honestly served its duty, remaining a formidable weapon in the arsenal of the country. Alexander Morozov, the creator of the legendary T-34, managed at the end of his career to accomplish one more feat. His last creation changed world tank production just as radically as the tank of victory once did. The T-64 became the ancestor of all modern Russian tanks, from the mass-produced T-72 to the latest machines of our time. The technical solutions embedded in this machine 60 years ago continue to live and develop, being embodied in the armor and firepower of new generations of combat vehicles.